We're gonna let folks come on in and join us. We're glad you're here. As folks file in uh, digitally, we'll just give it a minute or two to let folks come in. My name is E.R. Anderson. I am the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. And I am going to be moderating our conversation today, centered around the idea of booksellers and bookstores responding to hate. What we're doing in our stores, what we are doing together, what we're doing as leaders, what we're doing as people supporting our community members, and how we're asking for support from each other, from our community, and from the ABA, and also from our regionals, of course, since we are at our regionals right now. I wish that we were physically together. I really miss seeing all my SIBA buddies, and I'm sure that everyone who is here wishes the same with your regionals. So we're delighted to have y'all here. I want to introduce briefly my co-panelists, and then we're going to ask them to go more in depth about their roles in their stores. So joining me on the panel is Hannah Oliver Depp, who is the founder of Loyalty Bookstore, Kirsten Hess of Let's Play Books Bookstore, and Nathan Bernstein from Poets and Busboys. So welcome to all of y'all. I'm so glad that we get to be here together. We're going to encourage folks at any time. Glad y'all are already in the chat. Say hello. If you have questions, feel free to put them in. We've got more stuff to talk about than we're going to have time to do in an hour, but we're going to try and get to a lot of stuff. We have we represent 4 very different kinds of stores, but we also really want to honor where the most need is. And we suspect that might be a Kirsten's store. And so I'm going to start with, I'm going to ask you to begin and tell folks a little bit, Kirsten, about your experience, what your store is, where you're located, what's the vibe in your community, what's the current lay of the land, and then we'll go around.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I've had internet problems this afternoon. Okay, good. I am in Eastern Pennsylvania, and we're technically in a town of 11,000, which is in a part of a greater region of about 500,000. However, the town itself is relatively conservative, one of the oldest towns in all of Pennsylvania, founded by the Moravian Church. And there's never, ever any housing that is available because people basically stay here. They have a family, they've stayed here, their children stay in their home, they never leave. And I opened the store in 2013 as a children's only bookstore, and then in 2016 relocated to where I currently am now, which is just 2 blocks down the street. And we struggle because the people that live behind us, our neighbors across the street that go to our schools, don't necessarily vibe with the political stances that we've taken over the course of the last 4 years, but also just with the social movements that have been moving in the country, and the awakening of so many of the white cis people in this country of going, oh, this is happening. Oh, there's a problem. And you're telling us to feel guilty, and you're telling us that we should be better. And we have AK-45s on people's backs that can walk right in front of our store because in Pennsylvania, it's open carry. It's totally allowed. There's 3 gun stores within walking distance to my shop. So that's the lay of this land. How's that?
That's great. It's not great that that's your lay of the land, but it is a great summation. So thank you. So Nathan, why don't you share a little bit about your role at your store and sort of the ecosystem that you're coming from?
Hi everyone. I'm Nathan. I am a store supervisor at Busboys and Poets, which is a chain of restaurant bookstores in DC, Maryland, Virginia. It's every location is a restaurant primarily, and also has a small independent bookstore kind of tucked inside. And the bookstores are very small, but are very curated. One of the missions of Busboys as a general company is to be an extremely community and social justice oriented organization that is focused on promoting conversation and having events, and particularly speaking up for different marginalized groups. And that's something that is generally the case at all of the locations, and the bookstore in particular takes that to heart. However, because we're a restaurant bookstore combo, we serve, and we're in DC, we serve the general public, and people come in who don't even realize we're a bookstore at first. People are coming from all over the place, and we get a lot of people who are at varying degrees engaged in politics. Again, we're in DC. We've got a lot of people who are extremely engaged in politics, from most areas of the political spectrum. And then we also get some people in who are not at all engaged in politics and are frustrated by the number of anti-racism books we've put on our wall, and are saying to me, why is this something I have to pay attention to? Why do people keep telling me that like I'm racist, and expect me as a white bookseller to agree with them? So it means that we've got a real variety of different perspectives that we kind of have to confront and deal with. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Yeah, thank you. And so your role is, you're not an owner, but you are a manager. You have a fair amount of power in terms of creating displays, supporting other booksellers.
Yes. So we have 8 different locations. I'm in charge of one of them, of the bookstore at one of them, at the Tacoma location. And so I am in charge of what backlist books we order, what displays we have, what signs we have up. But I'm also like the person who's the general manager of the entire location, can tell me that there's something that she doesn't want to see, or that she doesn't like a certain thing, and I'm also subject to both the director of operations, who's in charge of all the different bookstores, as well as the owner and VPs of the overall company.
Great. So some of what we wanted to talk about is, our individual relationships to power, right? Because what we often hear is, lower level booksellers being like, I want to make change, but I don't know what to do, or I feel afraid of rocking the boat within my organization or within my store, and I want tips on how to do that. And so we do want to honor the fact that we're coming at this from different power levels than some of y'all may be experiencing. So Hannah, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, it's only been 4 years of constant Zoom. I'll figure it out eventually. Hi, y'all. I'm Hannah Oliver Depp. I'm the owner of Loyalty Bookstores. We're placed in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is just over the line from DC. And our other location is in the Petworth neighborhood of Washington, DC, which the traditionally kind of like Black middle class neighborhood that now is filled with $1 million condos. That has been an interesting trajectory to watch in the last few years. Before that, I was a bookseller in several other pre-existing stores. So I've gone from like frontline bookseller to store owner in the past few years, which has been wild. Our store is clearly Black and queer owned. And so it has a mission base to increase diversity of all marginalized voices in the book industry, as well as creating career booksellers of color in our industry. So that's kind of our core mission. But most people just see us as like their general neighborhood bookstore. So there can be sometimes some surprises about what we do and don't have on the shelf there.
Thank you. I think that's really important because, Karis is a mission-driven feminist bookstore. And so one of the things that we were just joking about in the green room is, people will sometimes, as customers, will sometimes as a threat be like, well, I'm taking my business elsewhere when they don't like a book on our shelves. And I think sometimes on your shelves as well at Loyalty. And it's very easy for us to be like, cool, because that person is
not for you. That's right, not why we're here.
Right, exactly. And so I think even in envisioning this panel, there were, I think it's important for us to acknowledge the diversity of stores within our regions and talk about, as you know, Karis is a very mission driven store and has been since 1974. And so we are like, we have a very specific core of customers, right? And you're a mission driven store, but you have a slightly broader core of customers. Nathan has, they are even bigger sort of, but they have a core of customers. And Kirsten, you're a general store and you're trying to serve some of these same populations, but you're in a space that if you were to say like, no, I only want to serve these people, you'd go out of business, right? So
completely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like we all are kind of trying to serve some similar ideas, but the way that shows up is really different. And I also want to acknowledge there may be conservative booksellers within our regionals who feel like they are being erased or misrepresented or underrepresented by the ABA or by the regionals. I've certainly heard that perspective, and though that is not my perspective, I do hear it, and I know that that's real. So
we also have the flip side of some of our like further left compatriots in bookselling who are often dissatisfied with what we're doing too. It's interesting because you can have complaints in bookselling, but actually also in our customer base, which we were kind of joking about in the green room, but people will be mad at Kirsten for having a book on the shelf because it's too left, and the same book in my bookstore is considered too right. And so you can get customers will find a way to be upset.
Yes. So I kind of want to roll into our bird's eye view of issues that are coming up in your stores. So some people kind of date our recent turmoil, like, back to Trump. Some people roll back to, the murder of Trayvon Martin and the beginning of Black Lives Matter. Some people go further back to the 2008 recession. Like, everyone has their own frame. Some people would just go back to the pandemic, right? Like, I don't know what your frame is in terms of when you think our recent troubles began, right? But I think everybody has a like frame of like, shit's been hard for a while. And what a while means may vary by what is important to you and to your people. For Karis, we felt a real big shift around 2013 and Trayvon Martin's death. And that really changed kind of how we were engaging as a store and who our customers were and the risks we were willing to take. Are you now, as the pandemic rolls on, if we just look at the last couple of years since the pandemic began in 2020, are you facing different pressures from school boards, city council people? Are you facing any landlord intimidation, individual intimidation? Are you seeing religious fundamentalism as a problem?
Okay.
Are you having longtime customer? Yeah, like, are you experiencing changes in longtime customers, neighborhood gentrification and stuff like that? People on the internet harassing you, people who have never been your customers harassing you. You can go anywhere you want and anyone can start us off, but maybe Kirsten, maybe this is for you.
Sure. I love that you identified framing of reference of when it kind of things shifted for us in 2016 when Philando Castile was murdered in his car with his girlfriend, because we had a event the following day at another bookstore that I was attending, and I could talk for 10 hours about that 1 hour meeting, but it was with Michael Smith, and his book was about being a Black man in today's society. And he basically said to the audience, which of course was mostly white, I can't talk to you guys today. I can't be here for you. Me and my people are exhausted, and I'm exhausted, and you need to do something. And I had a bookstore for 3 years at that point and was like, he's absolutely right. I have a great bookstore, and you come in and you will see everyone represented here, but I am not putting anything positive of change out into the world. I just have a safe space, and I want to have an inclusive place where people can feel like they belong anytime, anywhere, any place, by anybody. But that's very different than going out into the world and saying things and doing things. So that's when I started opening my mouth. And anyone that knows me knows that I say a lot of stuff that sometimes doesn't make any sense. I have to say it to think it. And I'm like, oh, I didn't really mean that. And that has gotten me in trouble because I want to build bridges, as I think we all do in this industry. My objective in this community is to bring people in that perhaps are watching news that may not be factual. Let's say that, and have a conversation. Let's have civil discourse. Let's discuss, let's learn, let's read, and not ostracize and not make people feel unwanted. Because when I say that we want to have a place that is of belonging, I mean that for everyone. As long as you're not coming in here and threatening my staff or me, you are welcome. And that goes both sides. And that gets me in trouble with my incredible left side. I'm technically a PCP, you know, the smallest identified, you know, voted in member of the federal government or state government. And that's gotten me in trouble. I spend a lot of time working with school districts, and they get a lot of I have a lot of sales from them. But then I go to the meetings and I talk about Black history being something that we need to be addressing, and get yelled at and screamed at. And my 17-year-old daughter has to defend me in public. So it's very face to face, but not in the store. They will not step foot in this store. And therefore, most of the hate comes on the internet in forms of trolling. And we're so small, it feels very personal. And I have definitely struggled with that aspect. Are the kids that work for me safe? They're 16, they're 15 and 17. Nobody can work here alone anymore. So it's really changed how we operate the business. But we're not getting quieter, we're getting louder. But I will say things like we have an anti-racist pledge on our website. None of the hate groups have seen that because they won't bother going to our website. You know, the only people that are going to our website are the people that kind of care about books and the industry and banning books and things like that. So
I appreciate so much of what you said. And I know that I do want to, you say kids, sometimes people think that means like anyone under 30, but you literally employ teenagers. And yeah. I think that's awesome. First of all, I was a teenage bookseller. I started in this industry as a 15-year-old. I'm 40 now, you know, and I think it's so important for all of us to employ teenagers. So I'll just say that as just, I love that. But, you know, when you have people walking outside with AK-15s, we really do. I used to work in the store all the time as a teenager by myself, and no one ever thought about it. And I do think we're living in a different moment where we have to really assess where are these threats coming from. Are they often, you know, what we used to do, Karis would get hate mail and it would be like, let's try and trace the IP addresses and be like, is this coming from inside the house? Literally, like, is this person in Atlanta or no? And 99% of the time it was some Yahoo in Ohio, right? Like, it was not people near us. Because as you said, they aren't coming to your store. They're actually afraid of you in a lot of ways, but that doesn't make it not terrifying, and it doesn't make it not hurt. And I think the business to business stuff and the school stuff is really important. And I want to talk about that because that is what is at risk in a lot of these places. And it's a place that Karis in particularly has always suffered of, like, as a bunch of queer and trans people since the 70s, like, the school system has never wanted us to be doing school book fairs. And, you know, and it's been interesting to see straight and cis booksellers get into the schools in our area selling queer and trans books now, because we're like, oh, okay, like, y'all can do it, but we can't, right? So I do think those questions, particularly in this era of book challenges, are really, really important. And so I want to hear from Nathan and from Hannah about, you know, are y'all facing any of these similar threats? Or, you know, Hannah, you mentioned gentrification. You know, are there other sort of pressures that you feel like are coming down on you?
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, when did this start? You know, 1619, but also, you know, challenges for small businesses. You know, let's talk about how trade law changed in the 80s and has forever affected our industry and created things like Amazon. But I think a lot of us, you know, like you're saying, Kirsten, like, they're at some point directly related to Black Lives Matter, there was an event or a thing happening in our community that, we've had a lot of police shootings in DC, and several of our wards are completely neglected, except that they're over policed. And so there's a lot of violence we're dealing with coming in from all sides. And so that can be a really hard part of this. And then on the flip side, the aggressive gentrification of the city is like pushing folks further and further out of like where I grew up were just like safe spaces no matter what, because like I was a little Black child that could walk around in these spaces and like the entire neighborhood is like, where's your mom? So now I walk around and in the neighborhood that I used to hang out in as a kid, and I own a store, and people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, this is my business. I'm opening the door to my business. Would you like to buy a book? And these are people who think of themselves as extremely progressive. DC loves to pat itself on the back for being so liberal and so progressive. And it's not actually that progressive, which I think would be a funny thing for folks who like in the outside world, like think of DC as this big boogeyman and don't realize that like it's a neighborhood with people who live here of all sorts, because like that's how cities work. So it can be very strange. We opened just before the pandemic in 2019. And so while I've lived here for a long time and been working in small businesses here and in New York and in Jersey and all over kind of the mid-Atlantic, watching like the housing market and what's happened in the housing market in everywhere, actually literally nowhere is unaffected, but specifically here, go from a $300,000 house to a $900,000 house around like my bookstore, which was already in a gentrified neighborhood. Like watching gentrification turn into something that I don't even really have words for. Like I'm still learning about what's happening. And having my neighbors, change completely, like while we were all inside. And being like, oh no, like the people who like helped me build this store, many of them had to move there, and like, oh no, where are they? And that's not 100% the case, but our guys who hang out at the corner who always watch the store and make sure no one throws a brook through my window when they're a little messed up, those guys are getting the cops called on them now, and they're actually like an integral part of my neighborhood. And you grow up in certain places and the fabric and the rhythm of the neighborhood. And that's one of the reasons I opened a store here, because it's important to have a store owner who knows this neighborhood. And now that's changing too. So I'm trying to figure out how to reflect the neighborhood while also still being a voice for other people in our neighborhood. That's been a new challenge on top of the challenges I expected opening up a Black-owned bookstore in a rapidly gentrifying city, where it's like, oh, we're going to be a voice for people even as they're getting pushed out. But like the pandemic, as with everything else, turned that up to 11. Making sure that, we're still requiring masks in our store. We have immunocompromised people on staff. Everyone is from a background that has been more so adversely affected than the majority of kind of typical cis white America with access to healthcare. And so I'm very, very, very protective of my staff because I was treated well as a bookseller by some of my managers. And that's all I've ever wanted to provide as a boss, is like a place where they know that they're okay. And that's really hard to do in a pandemic. And it's really hard to do with very affluent people who are new to your neighborhood. So that's been a challenge, and one that I know Busboys definitely faces as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people coming to this panel might imagine like booksellers responding to hate as sort of specifically a kind of QAnon, like we don't believe
in.
Which
we have that too, but as you were saying, it's usually from people, you'll find the stamp on the angry, scary hate mail that comes to your store on a regular basis is from far away. Right. And as a Black-owned store, we got that before I had even opened my doors. I was getting hate mail. Yes. And so like we were as prepared as you can be for that kind of daily horror. I knew that was part of it. I knew I was creating a target, basically, because hateful people exist. But now it's like really mixed up, especially because we focus a lot on kids' books. And so we've had wonderful school partners and not-for-profit partners, and we're seeing a very like, they don't want to deal with the hate that we're getting, which I understand because they're trying to focus on the kids. And so it's like, it's a, I call it shadow banning. It's like, it's not that we're going to ban the books, it's that we're going to publish fewer of them. It's not that we're not going to sell the books, it's that we're not going to display them. Mm-hmm. It's not that we're not going to partner with loyalty, it's that we're going to do it on the DL. Mm-hmm. We're not going to have you come sell the books, we're going to pick them up at the store. And so there's like that thing happening, and also the very loud hate happening. And you're just like, I just want to sell books and please wear a mask. We give them away for free.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's what we, I want, that's a thing that I want people to hear, is that when we talk about responding to hate, it's not just the people who, it's not our contemporary idea of what the Klan is, right? It's not that. Mm-hmm. It's also the people who, as you're unlocking your store, don't think that you belong there, right? And that is also part of what we are responding to on a daily basis in lots of ways. This sort of genteel racism and sort of quiet, polite and mannered way of keeping certain people out of the spheres of power, and, the ability to build relationships and to even just stay in your neighborhood, right? I mean, all of those things are really complicated. So Nathan, when we talked before, I know something that you feel really passionately about as a manager is how you support your booksellers in making displays, in interacting with customers. So I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Well, something that actually made a really huge impact on, and I'm reminded of based off of what Hannah just said, based off of how I was treated as a bookseller. So before I worked at Busboys, before the pandemic started, I was a bookseller at another independent bookstore in DC. And I wasn't given a lot of leeway to to make the suggestions that I had, or to kind of implement any ideas. And I eventually left, both because of the pressures of pandemic and other reasons. And I started at Busboys last year as, again, just a bookseller. My supervisor, whenever I had ideas, I was kind of nervous about bringing them up. And my supervisor was always like, wow, that's a great idea. That's a great plan. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Why don't you go ahead and make that display that you're talking about? We should definitely order these books that you're mentioning. Like, these are titles that we should have. And my supervisor moved to a different position, and I became the supervisor 5 or 6 months ago, and started getting booksellers under me. And one of the incidents that actually, I think, was most firmly kind of established Busboys as a really positive and really positive work environment for me, was that somebody put in a special order for a book, one of Helen Joyce's books, Trans. And the person who ordered that book did not realize what the book was about, which is, it's an extremely transphobic book. The book came in. I recognized it as an extremely transphobic book. I mentioned to my supervisor, I don't think we should sell this book. This is not a book that I want to sell to someone. The person came in to pick it up. The book was behind me on the shelf. My manager was within shouting distance, and my bookstore said, and I said, yeah, we're not going to sell you this book. And my manager backed me up 100% and said, we have the book in our store. We could sell it. We are not going to, because these are not ideals that we want to promote, or we want to see as things that we're pushing out. And the person argued with me for a good long time. And that was something where, I was a bookseller at that point. And so when I became a manager, that was something where I was like, whoever is working for me, whoever I am supervising, they need to know that I will always have their back. I will always 100% of the time back their play. If they end up doing the wrong thing, then I will explain this person didn't realize, but I will never, ever, I will always stand behind what it is. If they're feeling uncomfortable with something, if they're not sure, if whatever, they can always just say, I'm not sure if we can do this. I'm going to have to ask you to contact my manager, or I'm not sure, or I'm new, I'm not totally sure, whatever. And so that's something where I feel like the people with, and that's also something where, again, I'm not at the top of the food chain at my bookstore. I've got several people above me, and recognizing that they're going to back my play. If I say, no, this isn't a book that we're willing to sell, or no, this is something that is, or no, this event is a problem, or no, the way you're speaking to me or the way you're speaking to my employees is not okay. This is not okay. I'm not going to stand for this. We are not going to have you here. And recognizing that that's something that is allowed, that is, recognizing that that's something that I can do and my manager will back me up, makes it so much easier to deal with whatever comes my way. Because it's like, I know that I have some amount of power. I don't just like, I don't have to say, oh, the customer's right, and I have to do what they say because money is more important than anything else. I can say, you know what, we have values and we're going to stick by them.
So I think that's so important. And we've got a great question in the chat that I want us to talk about. I would imagine that each of our stores, has a different set of values and vision statements, probably, or either, sort of internally bouncing around in there or codified and written down. And that helps guide our decision making. And those of us who are owners or leaders in our, like, the highest, at the top and don't have to answer to anybody, sometimes that's very easy because you can just be like, boom, get out. Or like, I'm not going to do business with this person, or I'm not going to, I'm not going to order this book for the store, or I'm not going to do this event or whatever. Nathan, you are very much in the middle where you're navigating between, in many ways, I think being in the middle is the hardest place to be. So particularly from like a HR and management perspective, because you're trying to please people who have power over you, and you're trying to please and protect the people who you are managing and taking care of. And that's tricky, right? So we have a good question from SP Rankin in the chat. It's actually a two-parter, but we'll start with the beginning. So they ask, how do you decide when to de-escalate a confrontational situation and when to take a stand? And then how do you take a stand safely? So I want to just kind of break that apart a little bit, because there is interpersonally taking a stand in the store, right? There's like a human in front of you. There's a human on the phone, right? And I think when we think about taking a stand, it's often that, right? We imagine it's like one-on-one interpersonal conflict with a human. But sometimes it's things like what Kirsten is describing, which is like being a part of the local government and going to just talk about something and it blows up, right? And then that's, do I speak at all when people are talking about banning books? Or it's something like, do I get involved in this neighborhood discussion about X, Y, or Z, or do I keep my mouth shut, right? Like there are a lot of levels of confrontation, and then also a lot of levels of what escalation and de-escalation mean. So I want to first sort of invite y'all to talk about maybe a time when you engaged in a situation that could have escalated or you could have de-escalated. You can choose whatever form of that you want to talk about, and how, just walk us through how you thought about your values in that situation and what you did. So Kirsten, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. And can we have like an entire day where we're just talking about this? Because I think certainly some of us could just talk forever and ever, right? One of the things that I took action on was I started a small group in town called Communities Organizing Against Racism. And it was very private and very small, with just 6 people in town that I knew, because as I started to notice the attacks that were coming on our social media, on our, all of a sudden we get, 1 stars on Google, which just came out of nowhere, right? And started to see some of the statements that were being made. About the same time, a swastika came up about a block from our store on one of the old mining town kind of houses. And that's what made me say, okay, we've got to talk about this. I can't hide this. I've hidden from the government, our local government, for 5 years. They don't care that I'm here, or 4 years at that point. They don't care that I'm here. The mayor's never been to our store. There's only 20 of us in town. You'd think that somebody would give a crap and read a book, but no, we're just not accepted by the town council. We're not. So finally, when I saw this swastika, I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. So I went to the council meeting and said, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but this is here. And oh yeah, we've heard about it. Nothing, no action, because you're not allowed to talk back and forth. So I called the press. And then I got a call from a council member who said, why did you call the press? You just made our town look really bad. You should have addressed it with us. I'm like, were you not at that meeting? Because I did, and you guys didn't talk about it, and it needs to be dealt with right away. The response was, there's no difference of a swastika than having a sign in my yard, which I have out front, that says Black Lives Matter, that they were equating those two things to the same thing.
Cool.
And, the balance between personal safety, my students, the ability to walk to and from the neighborhood. I don't think anyone's going to attack us. Could our store maybe get egged? Yeah, that's where I think. Abortion, on the other hand, is a hate issue that has come up quite a bit. That's where I even brought, people like send us postcards. You can't see that because of my stupid thing, but it's my face on it saying that I'm a baby killer, things like that, which, by the way, I've never shared any views on abortion one way or the other, just so you know. Those things feel very internal and emotional, and I don't know how to escalate it or de-escalate it. And what I've learned recently is that that's in me, and I've just got to figure out how to accept that I can't make friends with everyone, because that was always my issue, right? Everybody can get along. Okay, whatever. I'm finally old enough to understand that that's not going to happen. But by drawing attention to it and getting the press involved and just having people have conversations, it elevated, it took care of it. And the swastika was taken down. Ironically, not by the police, not by the council, but by a reformed white supremacist who heard about it through the grapevine and went to his old buddy who knew that guy and said, take that crap down. Wow. Small town. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting because that duality of you want to hold out hope that people can change, and then there's randomly a guy who actually did change.
Who did change?
That's beautiful.
You have to remember that.
You
hold on to it.
That is a value that we hold really fragilely, I guess, at Caris, which is that we believe absolutely in the capacity of people to change. And that's part of our abolitionist value, is that people are not disposable and people deserve the right to change. And if we freeze people in time, then they stay stuck, forever as being bad, right? And that's not what we want. But at the same time, if people are sending you, I mean, we get similar hate mail of you're baby killers, you're this, that kind of stuff. And that's so painful and it's terrible, right? It's also not about you. And I think that's so painful too, because you're you don't even know me. You don't know what I believe, right? But I think that holding lightly that capacity of people to change, and also believing people when they treat you badly and being
yes.
Oh, right. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to just allow myself to be vulnerable for no reason. Or the people who rely on me, right? So, Hannah, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it is a real challenge because a lot of the folks who work for me are frankly never safe, and they're safer in my store and probably in DC than they are in a lot of places, but they're not safe. So figuring out the levels of unsafe is an issue. And it's kind of I think the same thing that Kirsten, I have a lot of family who are all over all of the spectrums, and I have to, hope for change and growth, because I certainly have changed a lot, and then also think about safety, right? And it's that to the question from the question to the panel. It's when do you decide to engage? Really is what I'm seeing, versus just be nope, shut it down. And I kind of think about, I'm paraphrasing the Baldwin, but we can't have a conversation if your baseline belief is that I'm not a person. And I'm completely boiling down. Like if your baseline is, you know, that I'm not a human being and I do not have rights, then we can't actually have a conversation. So like, where are we starting from is actually usually, we tend to think of it, we tend to try to do everything ourselves, which I love, Kirsten, that you created a group for support and that you also sought other things that you do have agency over, like the news or like, you know, pinging things out to other people in your town, because independent booksellers think we have to do everything ourselves. And like, there probably is an existing group or person working on stuff. And if not, there's people who want to be part of one. And then, you know, that kind of bigger stuff versus the immediacy of the situation of, you know, what do you do when someone is arguing with your frontline bookseller? What do you do when you are the frontline bookseller? It's really, really hard on the store's payroll. We're very small, but we try to be as little as possible. We have very physically small bookstores. It could be run by one person, but I don't want to leave them alone. So as much as possible, there is someone there, especially towards close, when the stores tend to be more populated because people are like picking up books or browsing while waiting for a dinner reservation or whatever. So not leaving folks alone. And like Nathan said, like, I have your back. And I am going to step in and like physically put myself in the line of fire. And so there's, you know, things like reading their body language and seeing where they're coming from. We want it to be about what my actions are going to be, but I am actually reacting to the aggressor. And so realizing that that's what's happening. And is this a person who's asking a question because they are genuinely asking a question, even if it's coming from a place that like is offensive to me, which is different than when do I need to just say no because I'm not a human being to you. We recently had a hate group come and scream at us during our drag queen story hour. We've had people hold up signs before. We've had people do a counter story time. We've had things happen. We've never had anyone be that aggressive. And they have a right to hold up their signs and they have a right to do their thing, but they were physically putting themselves between the kids and the storyteller. They were physically aggressive without ever touching anyone because they are trained for this. Very, very clearly trained for this. And but there was no human to human place to start with that. We had to shut that down, right? There was no way of reaching folks who do not see us as queer people as human beings. That there's nothing to do there, right? Especially not in that moment. The main moment was to get the kids and the storyteller to safety. And that was just shut it down and move on. Now there was like a lot of folks who wander up when we're doing those story times are like, what's going on? Is that a man or a woman? Like asking, just like, they're genuinely confused. Maybe they're not from here, maybe they are from here, but they've just never encountered this before, whatever. And we start out by answering the question honestly and factually. And people are like, that's usually the response is, Sometimes they stay and watch, sometimes they move on to something else. And you can tell the difference between when someone thinks you are a person and your bookseller is a person and you deserve to exist on the planet, and when someone has no recognition of your humanity. And that's how I decide whether it's de-escalation or at least starting the conversation. And when it's out of the store, shut the door, we're done.
I think that's a really good metric. I appreciate that. Like solid line. Nathan, I want you to go, but I'm going to add a little layer to this, which is, are there any specific policies, procedures, contracts, strategies, any like toolkit things that you use to help you in addition to values? It's fine if not, but I realized that was already kind of a thing we wanted to talk about.
Right. Well, I'll say, I think I have a somewhat different situation than most people because, again, I work in the same place as a restaurant. There's no way a bookseller would ever be alone because even though we're almost always the only bookseller there, there's always people who are working in the restaurant. Many of these people are also very accustomed to like getting rowdy people out because that's something that you're used to in the food industry. So they know how to read body language and step in between. And so that's something where we're very lucky that if there is an issue, we have people that we can turn to, and we can say, like, generally they will notice if something is up, but we also have people that we can turn to and say, hey, I need some help right here. I need to get, this person isn't accepting my response and is being aggressive or whatever. It's also one of the reasons why I don't worry. I worry about my booksellers in terms of them having to deal with somewhat uncomfortable situations, but I don't worry about them being in danger for that reason, because I know that they're not alone, and I know that there are a lot of other people there who will look after them if I'm not there. So and so that's one situation in which I'm really lucky. And I'll say, like, I think if it's for a controversial event or something that's going on that where you're worried about safety, I think that's somewhere where you can potentially reach out to local businesses that can do that. Like restaurants in general, a lot of restaurants do events or have event spaces or whatever else, and they're very used to handling these kinds of customers in a way that booksellers are, like, we're just not in the same way. And so that's something where that's something that can be a really useful resource if you can't do that yourself. In terms of a one-on-one thing, I'll say for me, it depends on, I mentioned this before. I get a lot of people, I'm white. Almost all of the wait staff at Busboys and Poets, almost all of the serving staff at Busboys and Poets are people of color, almost entirely. We get a lot of customers. In who are white and who basically think, okay, this is a white person, I can talk to this person and they will agree with me, or at least they won't shut me down, or at least. And so in those situations, it's my I almost never shut that person down, because I almost always want to engage them and say, why are you saying this to me? Why are you saying you don't feel like you feel like too many people are telling you to be anti-racist? What is this? What is your problem? Let's dig down into this, so that they actually have to confront it, because they mostly won't talk to people of color about it because they know that this is a racist thing to say. Somewhere in there, they know that this is a racist thing to say. So when it's about race, I pretty much always engage, because I feel like that is one of the few opportunities I have where I actually can. When it comes to the other aspect, is I am very obviously and visibly queer, and I'm specifically non-binary. I wear a mask with my pronouns that say they, them. People occasionally will engage with me on the fact that my pronouns are they, them. And that's something where I usually will just shut down the conversation, in part because I don't feel the need to justify myself and my existence as a person. Like Hannah said, this is my life as a person. If you're not willing to engage with me as a person, then I'm not going to justify myself to you. And in part because, like, it's my identity that they're attacking. If it's and I'm not a person with privilege in this circumstance, and I don't feel that, and it's not my responsibility to. It's just not my responsibility to confront people who are using their position of privilege over me. So I usually kind of try to do a privilege check in those situations, and if I'm in someone with privilege, and then I usually will try to engage if I can. If I'm someone without, if I'm not, and if I don't have privilege, then it's just like, do I feel like educating this person? If I don't feel like educating this person, you know what? That's not my responsibility. I'm not getting paid for that part. So that's not something I'm willing to do. So, but it is one of those things where I don't worry as much about the physical safety part of it, and that's something where I'm really. And I know that not everyone has that, not most people don't have that kind of setup.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I do think that line of, we often have to remind our customers, our booksellers, that the thing that made them love being a customer of Karis is not always the same thing that they will experience working at Karis, because they are then creating the space of safety and at relative safety, right? But like, and happiness and connection for other people. And once you become, it's still customer service, right? Like, and once you become the holder of that container for other people, you unfortunately like abdicate a little bit of your like joyful experience of being in that space. And that's a hard, whether you work at like a theme park or a restaurant or whatever, it's like, I remember my friend growing up who got a job at Ben and Jerry's and then hated ice cream. It's like anywhere you start to work, you're like, oh, right. Like this is the underside, and we can craft the best policies in the world and be the best employers in the world or the best managers. And the reality is, once you take a space that you love and make it your job, it becomes a different relationship. And so I think there's, SP Rankin is asking about, how do we know when we intervene or support our staff? And I think the best thing to do is be really clear with anyone you hire up front. It is 100%, I'm here to support you. And there are going to be conditions where you're going to need to be really explicit with me about the kind of backup you need. And I'm not always going to be able to back you up, like particularly around like in the moment is what I mean. Like we will process afterwards, but like I'm not going to hear every microaggressive thing that a customer says to you. So like, and that's just because this is still part of the world, right? Like I think sometimes there's this idea that bookstores can be utopian spaces, and they just can't, because they're part of the world. So how do we do that knowing, customers are sometimes going to be assholes to you, even in places that seem otherwise idyllic or that you've experienced as really lovely as a customer. What is the aftercare part of that? And I think that's the part we as managers and owners and leaders really need to get right. It's the what happens after. We can't make the space perfect and safe, but we can really work on our relationship to our employees in supporting them and thinking through, okay, how do I wish I had responded? Do I wish I had just walked away? Do I wish I had tapped someone else in? Like what Nathan is saying, they are down to, as a white person, intervene on racist comments because they have power and privilege. They are not so down to be talking about pronouns with transphobic people, right? Like these are my boundaries. And how do we model boundaries for our, frontline booksellers, and especially for younger employees? Like that's a skill that gets easier to learn as you get older and have more time in the world. So are there any like specific, so one thing I also just want to ask is there anything specific from our regionals or from the ABA, like trainings or strategies or legal support or advice, anything like that, that you think would be helpful for your stores, but more generally? Because I think part of why we're having this is because people, I think the ABA and then obviously our regionals want to know, how can we be supporting booksellers at this time? So are there things that you think that y'all would get a lot out of, or that other people might who are on this webinar?
Hannah, do you have something? Like, I thought you went like this.
I was like, no, I do. I have like 30 things. And I was like, oh my God, we're almost out of time. I think like there's a couple things, and like the aftercare part is so real. The best managerial advice like I ever got was like, everyone needs a 5. That's not their break. And like, then they can come back, and then you still have to talk about with them what happened, because like it's hard to have those conversations sometimes. And then the other thing is, just like all the signs in your store are there, but mysteriously invisible to customers, codes of conduct, all of that stuff should be posted legally for you in case something ever comes to that. So if you have a code of conduct, make sure your staff read it, not only the day that they are hired, but repeatedly, and however your store is structured, if they're volunteers, if they're staff, if they're managers, whatever, all of your processes need to be written down. And if there is a tool I could ask for, it's that we continue to make, because a lot of these things do exist from, I know from NABA and from the ABA, but it's like continually re-upping them, which is a thing I think all of us can fail at, but like templates for these kinds of things. And as well as, conversations and training sessions that we've done throughout the years about documenting your processes for when things don't go great with a customer, or a community leader, or just in general out in the world. I had, unhoused folks, some of whom became really, really obsessed with me at a different job that I had. And it was not a safe situation, but I also did not want to engage the police. And so like we had to, as a store, figure out what that was going to do, like what we were going to do. And if possible, to have sessions where we think through these scenarios, because it's better to try to think through the worst case scenario before it happens and work your way back and document and plan for it, and then regularly practice with your staff. What are the routes in and out of the store? What do you do in case of fire? What do you do in case of a threatening person outside of the store? What do you do with a threatening person inside of the store? What do you do with someone who is just belittling you as a human being? And what do you do later about that? Practice those things, because we freeze or we freak out or we just get really mad or we shut down completely. Like everyone has different reactions to crises. Yeah. So practicing those things, having them written down, taking, and maybe having sessions and spaces to do that. Because as we all know, just getting through the day sometimes is really hard as a small business. And so I think we, could do for creating some work sessions, maybe to review the things that we have from our national and our regional trade associations and help maybe work through those things. Because you got to have them written down so you can point to them if you need to ask somebody to leave or etc. But you also need them for yourself and for your staff, because of the safety of like knowing that my boss has written this down and it does matter and it is real and it's not just words. It's a big mental safety for people.
And I don't remember if it was NEBA or the ABA who did the de-escalation training.
We both have. Yeah.
Okay. But the handout of the de-escalation training, we have that posted on our point of sale monitor. And I think that's really helpful, because in that moment, if you freeze with a customer or a person that's being threatening in your store, you can literally look at that list of things about like, which one of these would be helpful right now, right?
Yeah.
And just trying to train our staff to be like, look at this list, even if it, like which one of these strategies can help you. So if folks don't know that, I think the de-escalation training is, but maybe one of the folks from our regionals can pop it in the chat if they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, you might need to be logged in both, I think, on NEBA and the ABA to see it, but yeah, they're under the education tabs on the websites.
Kirsten, just final thoughts. Anything? We got about 2 minutes. Anything you want to make sure folks know? I know we could talk all day, but any last?
No, I mean, one of the things I think the either ABA or regionals could do to help us facilitate is very similar to
for about 3 more minutes.
This session. We're very different in different places, right? Mm-hmm. I'm from Washington, D.C. As a cisgender female, white female, I have never felt unsafe around other white people in any way, shape, or form. And I haven't even felt unsafe around all Black people, because that's where I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, with 95 languages spoken at my high school and yada, yada. So I come from a place of privilege. I'm in a place where I'm actively trying to cause trouble, but pace what I'm doing. And I have a privilege to do that, right? Because it's not my life. I'm only, maybe somebody at the school board's going to yell at me. Well, I'm a wuss and I tend to cry immediately. So that's who I am. But that's only because I don't know how to get to that person, right? I don't know how to talk to that person. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm babbling. The point is that getting together, I would love to be a resource for people that have smaller stores that are working by themselves, or thinking, what do they want to do and how far do they want to go with how loud they can be. I couldn't be loud until I did my own work. I had to figure out inside before I started preaching anything, because God knows I was screwed up in all sorts of ways, still am, and be able to make those mistakes, but own them and learn from them. And I think a brand new person might not understand that. And part of every person that walks into our store, that emotional intelligence of going, where are they on their journey and how can I help them and not ostracize them? The people that work for me, onboarding. The number one thing that I believe in when we have our sit downs is you have to realize that every single person that walks into this store already has a preconceived notion of everything about themselves and what you should know. You're supposed to be experienced in 18th century poetry, right? Of course you are. You're supposed to be exactly where they are in identifying where they are on a social basis of white fragility. You can't do that with everybody, but you can get cues and you can learn and you can try to gauge. And our staff need to know that, as you guys were saying, that they're supported by me. And I need to continually remind myself their experience is not my experience. I have a transgender 17-year-old boy working for me. I will never have his experience. And as managers, we have to just be able to say, I'm not going to get this, but I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen.
That's so important. Thank you. And Nathan, we are running out of time, but I just want to say thank you for all of your thoughts. And I want to encourage folks, all of these folks have their contact information available. So reach out to them individually. If they so desire, I'm sure they will reach back out. They're all busy though. So, we're all busy, but always happy to talk more. I would love for y'all to please stay tuned for the interlude, which is coming up. It is a video by Olena Karchenko and Michael Sampson called The Story of Ukraine. Thank you to everybody who participated in the chat and who asked great questions. Thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate your leadership in your stores, in our regionals, and in our industry. It's a beautiful thing to keep trying new things in this industry, being vulnerable, failing, trying again, all that stuff. That's how we learn, and that's how we shape our industry in the direction we want to go. So it's an honor to be here with all of you, and I am very grateful. So thanks, everybody. Stay safe and well, and have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.